Today, we are excited to be joined by Dr. Rick Dina. Dr. Rick has been studying and practicing a fruit and vegetable-centered approach to raw, plant-based nutrition since 1987. He worked at Hippocrates Health Institute and for the Juice Man before entering Life Chiropractic College in 1993. He practiced at True North Health Center from 1997 until 2001, helping patients recover from high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and other nutritionally related health challenges with fasting and whole food plant-based nutrition. After teaching at Bastyr University in the naturopathic medicine program, Dr. Rick maintained a private chiropractic and nutrition practice from 2003 until 2008 in Northern California with his wife, Dr. Karen Dina. Rick has been featured speaker at many raw festivals, including the Raw Living Expo and Woodstock Fruit Festival. Dr. Rick is dedicated to teaching a functional and scientifically sound approach to raw plant-based nutrition. This includes the highly acclaimed Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online curriculum, as co-author of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook via his YouTube channel, and with individual patients and lab work analysis via Dr. Rick's Raw Food Nutrition Consulting practice. You can learn more about Dr. Rick's work at rawfoodeducation.com and rawfoodconsulting.com. Thank you for being here with us today, Dr. Rick.
Hey, Robbie and Cyrus, I'm really honored. You guys have an awesome summit, and it's a privilege to be here. So really happy about that.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Your interview last year was fantastic, and we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail than we did last year, and also have some fun today because, let's start at the top. There's a lot of confusion in the world of omega-3 essential fatty acids, as you know, as Robbie knows, as I know. And many people, regardless of whether they're living with diabetes or not, whether they're plant-based, whether they're not, most people are very confused about what essential fatty acids are, how much is necessary, what's the best source from your food, is fish oil necessary, is any oil necessary, should I get it from flax seeds, should I get it from hemp seeds, and most importantly, what is evidence-based versus what is marketing, because there's a lot of confusion just on this single set of nutrients. So we're with you today. One of the reasons that we wanted you so badly in this summit is because you are a true master of essential fatty acids. And this interview is going to be totally different than our typical summit interview because we're going to be able to take a look at my own personal omega-3 test results. And in the process, you're going to help clear up a lot of the confusion in the world of essential fatty acids, hopefully leaving no stone unturned. So how about we dive right into my test results and take a look at the results of the omega-3 test that I took about a month ago.
That sounds awesome. And thank you for positioning me as a master, although I'll tell you what, I still have a lot to learn too, but compared to the general rhetoric out there, yes, I think we can definitely clear up some confusion by looking at some actual data here.
Fantastic.
Before we jump in, let me just say there are two essential fatty acids. There's one omega-6 essential fat called linoleic acid, and there's one omega-3 essential fat called alpha-linolenic acid. And in theory, you can take alpha-linolenic acid and convert it into the other two really important omega-3 fats called EPA and DHA. And so we're going to look at those, and we're also going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to see that I have a little different perspective on that based on the population of patients who I see who are eating whole food, plant-based diets and raw food diets, as opposed to the conventional people out there eating hamburgers and hot dogs and, an occasional wild salmon meal thinking, they're all set for omega-3s there. So, so given that as a preface, let's just jump right in. And yeah, this is a full disclosure. We're going to look at Dr. Khambatta's actual results here. And
am I supposed to get nervous at this point because the whole world's going to be looking at my test results?
You should be psyched because they might be nervous, but your results are awesome. Okay, perfect. So we see Omega Quant. That's the company I use as well. Here we see it's Dr. Khambatta, the results from just a couple months ago. And the first thing I want to point out here is they look at this thing called the omega-3 index. What they're looking at is they're looking at your, what do they call it? Your body weight. And so what they're looking at is they're looking at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And so we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to look at some of the information that comes with the test results. And we're going to cell membranes of your red blood cells. And so if you could think of a balloon, and you could think of the rubber part of the balloon, that separates the inside of the balloon from the outside of the balloon. And that's what a cell membrane does, separates the inside of a cell from the outside of the cell. And those cell membranes are made largely out of fat. And the mix of fat in those cell membranes has a critical influence over things like the insulin receptor, which affects our blood sugar levels, and the serotonin receptor, which affects our mood and mental functioning and all sorts of important stuff that we'll get into a little bit more. So what they do is they take EPA plus DHA, those two important omega-3s, and they say, what percentage of the total fat in your red blood cell membranes, which is indicative of the mix of fats in your overall cell membranes in the rest of your body, but it's much easier to get at your red blood cells than most other cells. That's why they test those. What percentage of that total fat is made up of EPA? And then you get this thing called the omega-3 index. And so for Dr. Khambatta here, it's 7.11. Now, interestingly, I always tell people results are only as good as the skill and the knowledge and the experience of the person who's helping to interpret those results for you. So at first glance, you look like, you're doing all right. You're kind of in the middle there, but you should be up here at 8 to 12. And you would first look at that and say, wow, that's not good. Now, I look at that and actually say, that's great. And here's why. So we're unfortunately not going to, we're going to leave a few stones unturned here because we can't cover everything. So for example, in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, we have about 6 hours worth of this. Let's think about our cell membranes here. And this is the quickest thing I could pick up on my desk to show a balance. So cholesterol. I love cholesterol. I want to talk about how much I appreciate cholesterol coming up. It's really important stuff. I want to talk about how much I appreciate saturated fat. Those things both add strength and stiffness and rigidity to our cell membranes, and we need some of that. Then we have unsaturated fats, and especially omega-3 fats. And without getting into all the gory details, a lot of double bonds, they're curved, they're fluid, they're flexible, they conduct electrical activity, and it's absolutely critical to have fluidity and flexibility in our cell membranes. Also, for those of you science nerds out there, you may have heard of something called the, quote, fluid mosaic model, which says we have to have stiffness and flexibility in the cell membranes. And I always use the analogy of a twist tie. I should have one here. It's got a certain amount of stiffness and it has a certain amount of flexibility too. So getting back to Dr. Khambatta's results, most people, the way most people eat, they have too much cholesterol and they have too much saturated fat. And you'll hear a lot more about that in the other interviews on this summit. So people's scales are tipping this way. So in order to compensate for that, you need a lot of super unsaturated fats like EPA and DHA to get a balance. And for most people out there, you need to be at 8 to 12% for that omega-3 index in order to be balanced. But what if you're not tipped like this in the first place? What if you're already in pretty good shape because you're not consuming excess cholesterol or excess saturated fat? Then you don't have as much to compensate for. So given that, and there's a lot more behind that. So given that, when I see an omega-3 index, knowing that somebody eats the way you do, Cyrus, which is, a lot of whole natural plant foods based on fruits and vegetables, 7.1 is actually a very good score.
Woo! So I was nervous for a while. So
yeah, that's right. Hopefully,
when I sent my test results to you, I was like, I'm in the yellow zone. Is that safe? Is that right?
Well, and so that's one good indicator, but on some of the other things that we'll take a look at here, that's where the rubber really hits the road.
Perfect.
What they do here is they look at the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And so this brings up another point. We need a certain amount of omega-6s. They're pro-inflammatory. We need a certain amount of omega-3s. They're anti-inflammatory. And so looking at that ratio is a better indicator of what's going on than looking at either of those levels out of context. So And then specifically, without getting too detailed, AA, known as arachidonic acid, that is the major pro-inflammatory omega-6 fat. And then EPA is the major anti-inflammatory omega-3 fat. So the general omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is useful in terms of inflammation in your body, and we'll discuss the significance of inflammation in a little bit coming up. The arachidonic acid to EPA ratio is most specific, and you can see there that you got in the desirable range for both of those. Even though your EPA and your DHA wasn't as good as they'd like, you're still good from a omega-6 to omega-3 balance perspective.
Good question. A lot of people talk about how the food we eat, like our diet, should be somewhere between 4-to-1 and 1-to-1 as far as consume. Is that similar here? Because I see that the desirable numbers are different on the screen there. So what you're eating should be also end up being the same inside the cell membrane, or is that different?
What happens in your body is a significant reflection of the fats that go into your mouth, but they're not exactly the same. So for example, let's say the three of us, we're going to look at all of our lab work in this interview. We have none of us consume any cholesterol, yet there's cholesterol in our body. And our saturated fat intake is low, but there's actually more saturated fat in our body than we consume. Now, so at the same time, if you eat more omega-3s, you tend to have higher omega-3 levels. If you eat more omega-6s, you tend to have higher omega-3 levels. So there's a strong connection between what we eat and then what's actually in our body, but it's not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay, so let's go back to this omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, because this is a question that we get all the time and a question that I think a lot of people are confused about. The goal is to try and get your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio lower. Standard American diet sometimes has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. I've heard as high as 12-to-1, 15-to-1, 20-to-1. And we're trying to get it down.
20 or higher even. It depends on the country and what people eat. But yeah, it's way higher. It's clearly pro-inflammatory because of all the sixes. Right on.
Perfect. Okay. So we know we're trying to drive it down closer towards 0, get it in the 2-to-4 range. What's the actual range that you would consider to be optimal?
So dietarily, you mean?
Dietarily.
Yeah, just what Robbie said. So 6-to-3 from about 4-to-1 to about 1-to-1. And typically when people are eating that, then what shows up in their body is something like we see what we just saw with your results.
Okay, so I think what most people do is they interpret that as they go, oh, I need more omega-3s. If I'm trying to get that ratio down, all I got to do is just put more omega-3s in. Get me the fish oil, get me the flax oil, get me the borage oil, get me the primrose oil, right? And so those are the things they go towards. Is it smarter to get more omega-3 into your body, or is it smarter to decrease omega-6? Question 1. Question 2 is, what foods contain omega-3? What foods contain omega-6?
Okay, awesome. So as we'll see, what a lot of people recommend for question number 1 is just get more omega-3s and don't worry about the omega-6s. There is some truth to that, although I think just taking that by itself is a huge mistake. Because what they're looking at, all the numbers we see here that we're going to see in a minute, the percentage of each fatty acid of the total, it's all relative. So your ratio of 6s to 3s matters. So if you start consuming fewer omega-6s, you're going in the right direction. If you start consuming more omega-3s, you're also going in the right direction. So instead of just eating a bunch of processed food with corn, cottonseed, and soybean oil, they're the major sources of omega-6s in the diet, and say, okay, I'm going to go from an omega-3 level here, and now I'm going to add some flax and borage and fish oil. Well, you're still pretty off. But if you do some of those things, let's say better yet, some piles of leafy greens and a few flax and chia seeds, and you stop eating processed food at the same time, now you're really there's synergy there. So really both are important, but especially decreasing omega-6s, I would say, which will be in contrast to what the recommendations say here.
Where do you get omega-3 essential fatty acids, where do you get omega-6s?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's the good news. Fruits and vegetables have both omega-3s and omega-6s in them. Leafy green vegetables are significantly higher in omega-3 fats than omega-6 fats. So if you, let's say you decide to go off the deep end and do something crazy and radical, and your friends and family are all worried about you, and you decide to eat a whole food plant-based diet and focus your calories on fresh fruits and vegetables. Crazy stuff, right?
I don't know who would do that. That's a weird concept.
Yeah, I don't know. Three weird guys maybe hanging out on Zoom. So in any case, if you were to do that, and I've tested a pile of people who eat exactly the way I just described, you have plenty of omega-3s, plenty of omega-6s because you need enough of those, but not an excessive amount. And then you end up with a fatty acid profile that is excellent. So especially leafy greens. Now, if you eat a piece of iceberg lettuce on your cheeseburger, that's not a sufficient quantity to add up to the omega-3s. But if you consume about 100 calories worth of leafy greens, that's like a big head of romaine, or maybe 2 medium to small heads of romaine, which if you eat a big salad or two each day, if you make some smoothies, if you make some juices, it's not that unreasonable. You can get about 1 gram of the omega-3 essential fat known as alpha-linolenic acid. Institute of Medicine says if you're a woman, you need 1.1 grams of omega-3s per day, and for a man, 1.6 grams. So just in that 100 calories worth of leafy greens, you're most of the way there for your omega-3 needs. Now, if you go on an exclusively fruit diet, maybe you just eat fruit and potatoes and rice, you will not be getting enough omega-3s that way, and then you'll have to add some flax or some chia seeds. But just fruits and vegetables, believe it or not. I'm not saying everyone should only eat fruits and vegetables. I don't do that, but it's the foundation. Even if you just do that, as long as enough leafy greens are there, you can get enough omega-3s and 6s in a really good profile.
Okay, so we have another hot question for you here. Is it necessary to eat nuts to have an excellent essential fatty acid profile?
Well, Mr. Robbie, we are going to look at your results, and we're going to show that you absolutely do not. And to give credit where credit's due, Robbie's 2 sets of results that we'll take a look at soon are some of the best ones I've ever seen. And your nut intake is super low, right? You're one of the crazy ones that bases your diets on fresh fruits and vegetables.
That's correct.
And you're part of the reason, you and other patients I've tested are part of the reason I can say with confidence that diet leads to excellent results.
And to be clear, I don't think any of us here are saying, nuts are bad, don't eat nuts. I think it's just a conversation around, okay, what is actually necessary to have a healthy fatty acid profile. There's more than one way to get there. I mean, I personally, I never have thought about it, like you're saying, and part of what we teach in Mastering Diabetes, it's just eat whole foods from a wide range of food categories, and nature ends up, the way you need it. I don't eat a certain amount of this or that to get more omega-6 or more omega-3. I just eat food.
Right on. And I think that's so awesome and very well said. And so when you eat that way, guess what? Your omega-3 to 6 profile is excellent. You're getting all, just about all the other essential nutrients. I mean, we could discuss vitamin D and B12 as exceptions. And guess what? It's a lot of fiber, which means you have a lot of prebiotics to feed your probiotics to keep your microbiome healthy. And, a lot of nutrients. pH balance is good. You get enough protein, calcium, iron, K2. Everything tends to work, which is really great. And then we're not out chasing the prebiotic supplement and the protein powder and the this and the that and the other thing that, healthcare practitioners put you on and charge you thousands of dollars to test for this stuff. And then they make money on the supplements. For those of us willing to really make these meaningful dietary changes, your bases are covered across the board, and it's just makes it all worth it. Cyrus, let's just make sure you're looking good here. So trans fat, right? Those unhealthy hydrogenated fats, you're really low. And that's not unusual for me to see. Pretty much everyone I see is low in that. And then here's where, just real quickly, and then we'll look at Robbie's right after and to support what we're talking about here. Here's where the rubber really hits the road. So we see that omega-3 index of EPA and DHA. And so here is alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 essential fat. This is the stuff found in plant foods, leafy greens, other fruits and vegetables, and flax and chia seeds are the most significant source. We got a little bit in hemp and walnut too, and some other things. But then EPA, this stuff is super important for decreasing inflammation, as we saw. And DHA, this stuff is super important for making our brain work properly and for helping a lot of hormones work properly, because the hormone receptors are embedded there in the fatty acid layer of the cell membranes of our cells. And that fatty acid environment has a significant influence over how those hormone receptors operate, such as making insulin work right. And what the typical rhetoric says, well, plant foods don't contain EPA and DHA, and lots of studies have shown that the human body doesn't convert ALA, found in plant foods, into EPA and DHA. Therefore, you need to take fish oil. Well, look at this. Your EPA level, Cyrus, is very solid, and especially compared to your arachidonic acid level here, you're on an anti-inflammatory diet. That's awesome. Your DHA level is very solid, 3.7. Well, we'll see in a little bit. That was my level too, and that's really solid. That's great. And when I go through this with our students, I ask them every time, if this person doesn't have an outside source of EPA and they don't have an outside source of DHA, yet there's abundant amounts of it in their body, how did it get there? It got there from converting from our omega-3 essential fat, ALA. And then I have history after history after history showing that. So this is where the rubber hits the road. Your body, Cyrus, makes enough DHA, and we've got it in black and white here to prove that. All right, going over to our star, Robbie. Look at his level, 3.9. So he edged you out. You guys are in the same range, but Robbie wins by a nose. It's a photo finish here. That's really solid. And you can see for both of you guys, like, Cyrus, you're in the 87th percentile for omega-3 intake, and Robbie, you're in the 89th percentile. And you guys are on low-fat diets, right? You're not chugging down the fish oil and the flax oil and that kind of stuff, but you're getting what you need from fruits and vegetables, especially from leafy greens, and a few flax and chia seeds here and there. That's awesome. So once again, if Robbie has plenty of EPA and DHA in his body, but no, Robbie, you're not doing the closet fish oil thing, right? This is the time to fess up.
No, sir.
Okay. I think we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. You'll be innocent unless proven guilty. So if you don't have an outside source, yet there's plenty in your body, you are converting from this stuff here, ALA, and that's awesome to see. Robbie, you and I met, seems like a long time ago now. And here's your results from 2010. And this is a different company, so you can't always compare apples to apples, but here you are with the DHA level of 5.4. And look at that. They show you red's not good, yellows. And so you're way up here into the green zone. And EPA is this one here. You're really solid there. Your total omega-3s, they want you to be greater than 3.8. It's a little different reference range here, but you're at 12.9. That's awesome. So you guys are 2 for 2. While we're at full disclosure here, here's some 2010 results from myself. And so I got 3.7 for my DHA score, tied with Cyrus here. Robbie beat us out. There's the omega-3 essential fat, my total omega-3s, and there's my EPA level. Well into the green zone, DHA well into the green zone. And, I would admit it if I would, but I'm not cranking down the fish oil in the closet either. No outside source of these two fats, yet there's plenty of them in there. So this is not unusual. This is what you expect to see when people base their diet on fresh fruits and vegetables and other healthy, whole, natural plant foods.
I like what you're saying about how you're pointing out to the people who are in your classes, like, look, where did that come from? How did they get those numbers? And I like to give our body the benefit of the doubt. Give nature the benefit of the doubt. We are designed to create our own EPA and DHA when we are consuming enough alpha-linoleic acid. And as you described, that alpha-linoleic acid is found in whole plant foods, which we're designed to eat. And I think, focusing on living a healthy lifestyle to promote your body's ability to convert should be the first line of defense in any situation where somebody wants to improve their fatty acid profile.
Amen, sir. You were that is right on. And up to maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I used to tell my students and patients that the biggest challenge was overcoming the addictions and the other things and the figuring out what to do for yourself. And that's still a challenge. But in today's world where everybody's trying to get your attention and, get views and all this stuff, and people, how many people really, when they're trying to figure something out, they're like, okay, boy, that's some complicated stuff. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop my life. I'm going to stop generating income. I'm going to go to school for several years and earn a doctorate degree and rack up a bunch of loans. And then I'm going to get years of clinical experience. And then I'm going to know the answer. No, who does that? Cyrus and I did, but not many of your other speakers, because we're super nerds, right? We want to know the answers. And Robbie, you're well educated too here, of course. But so anyway, so there's all this stuff. Okay, look at what's on the internet, repeat the rhetoric and just put it out there and you'll get views and you'll get hits and, all that kind of stuff. And so today we have just all this misinformation out there, and it makes it more difficult than ever. When I started 30 years ago, most of the information out there about nutrition was actually pretty good stuff. There was a few things to sort through. Today, there's more information than ever, but the percentage of it that's accurate is smaller than ever. And so now we have a situation where you're doing everything right. You've got it figured out for yourself, but then your friend says, oh, watch this YouTube video and see what this guy's saying on fish oil, and you're probably deficient in this, that, and the other thing. And then people talk them out of going on a healthy diet, or talk them out of their healthy diet. And then they don't feel as good, but they can't wrap their brain around, yeah, but my doctor said this and my friend said that. So anyway, data like this I just love it. It's like, this excites me. This is, my admittedly super nerd stuff, but I see this stuff and I'm just like, you can't argue with these results.
I got two questions for you here that deals with sort of differences between people, bio-individuality. Okay? Question number one, is there a significant amount of bio-individuality which exists between people? Meaning that, is it possible that some people who do eat a strictly whole food plant-based diet will still need to either supplement with omega-3 essential fatty acid rich food or with omega-3 supplements? Or is eating a whole food plant-based diet a prescription for 100% of the population?
Whole food plant-based diet with a lot of green leafy vegetables is a good prescription for about 90% of the people I have seen. There's absolutely bio-individuality. That's one of our favorite topics in what we teach. I mean, so for example, the three of us all eat pretty similarly, maybe not exactly the same. You and I were tied, Cyrus, for DHA. Robbie beat us by a nose. Maybe when Robbie's a little older, his might level, he might not convert quite as well. So there's an example of we're all in the same range, but we're not exactly the same. I've seen that with couples a lot. A couple and they eat the same way, yet their lab results are different. So bio-individuality definitely matters. For example, my wife and I eat very similarly. Her DHA levels tend to be lower than mine. So here's my hypothesis there. She's half Swedish and half Irish. So if you look back to all her ancestors, especially on the Swedish side, they all had outside sources of EPA and DHA from cold water fish, right? Because for most of the winter, that's all that was around. And if, we'll kind of look at this from there's different ways of looking at things, but let's just kind of stick with a certain view here. If her body and other Swedish people or Norwegian or whoever could not make their own EPA and DHA very well out of ALA, no big deal. There was no disadvantage because they always had an outside source. So if you take in a situation like that, I have found a small percentage, it's like a single digit percentage of people who I've worked with who still might need an algae-based supplement or, something to help correct, or not correct, but, recreate what their ancestors had in the past to make sure that they're covered in 2019 and beyond.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question is, suppose you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you're real diligent about it, and that's something that you truly believe in and you've been following through with for some period of time. Call it a year, 2 years, 3 years. You go get your omega quant test exactly like you showed, and you show up that your omega-3 index is low. Okay, in that situation, what are some remedies that you could do? Is it an algae-based supplement? Are there particular foods that are omega-3 rich? Can you give our followers a little bit of insight here?
I sure can. So that's an awesome question. So the first thing I like to do before resorting to an outside source, which you can get from algae, which is way lower in contamination than fish oil because you're at the base of the food chain, not several levels up, where you've got an exponential increase in mercury, dioxin, and PCBs each time. Even before resorting to that, what I try to do is work on the omega-6 to 3 ratio. So the major source for most people of excess omega-6s is, like I said before, corn, cottonseed, and soybean oil found in processed foods, including plenty of processed vegan foods. And from there, if you think about it, almonds and macadamia nuts and those types of things for our ancestors, they were never available year round. Okay, we would eat them in the fall to fatten up for the winter. And then they weren't around in the spring. They weren't around in the summer. So these days, though, people consume that stuff year round. And most concentrated fat sources are much higher in omega-6 fats than they are in omega-3 fats. So in general, lower fat plant-based diets tend to not have the excessive levels of omega-6s in them. And if you get a few omega-3s in there as well, then I usually make those type of recommendations for people to try to enhance their omega-3 conversion. And to make a long story short, there's an omega-6 family, an omega-3 family. We've just looked at the omega-3 family. They compete for the same set of enzymes in the body. So high omega-6 diets are known to inhibit conversion of omega-3s. So you guys are both low in omega-6s. I was a little bit higher, but still we were low enough so our enzymes could still convert the omega-3. So I start with that, then we follow up in a few months, and oftentimes that does the trick. But if it doesn't, it's like once we've exhausted you've done your best here, then I'm not against using an outside source of EPA and or DHA, but my choice is always an algae-based source. There's absolutely no reason, from what I see, to go to actual fish oil.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's actually really helpful. So second question here about sort of bio-individuality, following up on this topic, is that there's a lot of women that we have in our coaching program, and just a lot of women who have asked our business the same question, which is that they've heard from the outside world that they have to eat more fat-rich foods in order to establish a quote-unquote proper hormonal balance. You hear this all the time. I need to eat more fat because it's good for my hormonal balance. It's good for my hormones, right? Which is, technically speaking, a very vague statement. There's thousands of hormones that are circulating inside of our body at any moment in time. You and I both know that, right? But that being said, this statement may have some biological significance if we can kind of drill down into details. So question for you is it true that women and men have different either total fatty acid requirements or essential fatty acid requirements?
Well, absolutely. And ironically, the essential fatty acid requirements for women are actually lower. The omega-3 requirements are 1.1 grams for women, 1.6 grams for men. All right, so here we have the basic functions of cholesterol. And so if we go down to the bottom here, foundation of sex hormones. So if you did not make cholesterol, you could not make the sex hormones. And in an oversimplified nutshell, they're estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And women tend to have more estrogen and progesterone, but they also have testosterone. And men tend to have higher levels of testosterone. We have estrogen. We have, also. So in any case, if you don't have enough cholesterol, you can't make those sex hormones. So we need enough. And the thing is, what's great is our body makes cholesterol. So when the three of us get our cholesterol checked, there's cholesterol in our bloodstream. It's there. And when I've gotten my sex hormones checked, like my testosterone level and DHEA and those things, I'm always in the range, but I tend to be a little bit near the lower end of the reference range. And in my opinion, that's a healthy place to be, because most people are at excessive levels. And when you look at things like cancer risk factors, these sex hormones promote growth. So oversimplified again, testosterone turns boys into men, estrogen turns girls into women. Things grow. And so excessive levels of sex hormones are never the cause of cancer. Something has to alter your DNA. But again, this is oversimplified here, but for many types of cancers that they roughly lump into the group of hormonally based cancers, excessive levels of these hormones fuel the growth of them and accelerate cancer. And if you see higher fat, lower fiber eating societies with higher body fat and higher sex hormone levels, you see way higher levels of cancer rates than you do in societies where they have lower body fat and they eat less dietary fat and they eat more fiber. So having said that, absolutely, positively, fat's important, cholesterol's important. We need to make our hormones. But to say that therefore you need to go on a ketogenic diet or you need 40 or 50% of your calories from fat, that is not warranted in my experience. It sounds excessive to me.
Okay, this is excellent. One thing you touched on really briefly, but I want to make sure we're on the same page, is how quickly the results will change. Let's say somebody gets an omega quant test, they see that their profile is not good, and they're like, okay, I'm going to try these recommendations. I'm going to lower my omega-6 consumption. I'm going to hopefully improve my fatty acid profile. How long will it take? When should they get retested?
Okay, that's an awesome question. And this is a really easy answer, 4 months. And the reason for that is because they're measuring the fatty acid profile of the cell membranes of your red blood cells. And the average life of a red blood cell is about 120 days. So 4 months down the road, you have all new red blood cells. And if you start eating differently the day after the test, the new red blood cells are going to start to reflect the differences. Because again, even though it's not one-to-one, what you eat is a big influence over the fatty acid profile in your body. So anyway, 4 months but even after 3, it's kind of like an A1C. Red blood cells live 4 months, right? Glucose, glycates, the hemoglobin's there. If you check your A1C 4 months later, it's totally different.
Okay, and so this makes perfect sense. And, I just want to make it clear to everybody what we're saying here, because I know we're all on the same page. It's, you're saying, hey, first approach is to let's fix address the omega-6 problem of maybe consuming too much. And
optimize the diet first, right?
We have no affiliation with Omega Quant or Geneva Diagnostics, and those are just the best companies out there that we know, and those tests are very affordable. So it really is logical to do these tests and make lifestyle changes first versus just committing to consuming a supplement. And then maybe if you consuming a supplement, if you commit to consuming a supplement, maybe that will change your body's ability to do the conversion. So it might not be that good of an idea.
There's so much I could answer there. So number one is there is something to that. And seeing you ask the question, Robbie, I'm going to bring it back to your results here. ALA gets converted to EPA and DHA, but there is a feedback mechanism here. So if you have excessive amounts of DHA, your cell membranes in your bloodstream get so thin and fluid and flexible that that's not good. I used the twist tie analogy before. It's like your twist tie turns into a piece of string. That's not good. So in order to prevent you from getting excessive levels, if you already have enough DHA, in other words, you have enough of the end product, your body inhibits conversion so you don't get too much of it. So I haven't had a lot of clinical experience with that, but in theory, and I'd say in reality, there's a great likelihood that you're absolutely right. Taking more of the direct end products could shut down or minimize conversion. And then if you go off of those outside sources, it may take your body a few weeks or a few months for the conversion machinery to kick back up again and start working again. I could add a couple extra things about conversion and about people changing their diet. And one of my favorite things, if you may indulge me in this here, June 2011, first set of results on the left. April 2012, second set of results on the right. This is from the same patient. Now, on the left here, this patient was eating a higher fat raw food diet, lots of nuts and seeds. And then he met a woman, and women can change their men, or so they think, but in this case it worked. She changed him over to a much lower fat fruit and vegetable based diet, and then he had been doing that for several months, and then so here we see his results on the right. So higher fat, including higher omega-3s on the left, lower fat, including fewer omega-3s on the right. So we can see his total omega-3 percentage of his fatty acids in his cell membranes that were omega-3s were 5.3, high-fat diet, 8.4 on the low-fat diet. His DHA, 2.6 on the higher-fat diet, consuming more omega-3s, it went up to 3.0 on the lower-fat diet. And EPA was 0.63 on the higher-fat diet, 1.39.
Wow, his EPA more than doubled.
Correct. And so there's a perfect example. He went from a high-fat diet to a diet more like what you and Robbie eat. And I love making this point that even though, let's say he was eating a lot of 6s and 3s before, let's say it was kind of like this, he lowered his omega-3s, but he lowered his omega-6s even more because, again, most of those concentrated fat sources are higher in omega-6s than in omega-3s. So he got his balance, his profile better. Fewer omega-6s means those enzymes that convert the omega-6s and the omega-3s were more available to convert the omega-3s, and his EPA and his DHA levels went up. So that kind of ties together a lot of things that you guys have asked about. So should you bump up your omega-3s? Should you reduce your omega-6s? Well, he reduced his total fat, but his 6s more than his 3s. His profile improved. Robbie, you asked, can you eat just fruits and vegetables and have an awesome profile? Well, that's what you do. Your profile rocks. We've got, you're 100%. Both of your results look excellent. Here's someone a before and after whose looks excellent. And here's, if I may add, if you guys may indulge my inner nerd here to share a little bit more based on the things you have asked, it should be noted that because they have a different chemical structure than EPA and DHA, the omega-3 fatty acid found in flax or chia seeds, ALA, also known as alpha-linolenic acid, that is distinct from EPA and DHA. So they say we do not recommend an increase in ALA for the purpose of increasing the omega-3 index.
Very interesting.
So they basically, what they're doing there is they are discounting the body's ability to convert ALA into EPA and DHA. And if we look at page 2 of this report, I'm not making them wrong. I'm going to tell you why these guys are absolutely correct, but why? Because I see a unique population base of nutty people that eat whole natural plant foods based on fruits and vegetables. What's an outlier for most of the studies are the people who I see all the time. So let's see. So described in the omega-3 index report, the best way to lower both omega-6 and omega-3 and the AA to EPA ratios, right? Remember, so we saw yours, Cyrus, and Robbie's. Yours were awesome too, but we looked at Cyrus's. Yours were awesome. The best way to do that is to consume more omega-3 fatty acids. As described below in the omega-6 fatty acids section, the latest literature supports higher, not lower intakes of omega-6, and you do need enough of that, right? But we don't want excessive amounts, just like cholesterol. We need it in our body, but we don't need to eat it. Therefore, we do not recommend lowering your intake of linoleic acid as a strategy to lower these ratios. In other words, keep eating all the processed food you want. That's the main source of linoleic acid. Raising your intake of EPA and DHA from seafood or omega-3 supplements will, however, decrease both of these ratios and raise your omega-3 index.
Okay, can you go back to that statement there real quick? I want to that I think this is the crux of the argument right here. The latest scientific literature supports higher, not lower, intakes of the principal omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid. So that's where people get confused, because they look at something like this and they say, oh, this is evidence-based. That's what the scientific literature says. So I'm going to do that, right? And then they go do that and they get retested, and either they're no better or they're potentially worse. And this process keeps continuing over the course of time, even though it says it's evidence-based, but it's actually either looking at the wrong evidence or it's not evidence-based.
Absolutely. So, and here's the different perspective to be fair to them and fair to our perspective. So raising your intake of EPA and DHA from seafoods. You don't do that, right? We believe you. You're not cranking down the salmon in the closet there. Or from supplements, and you're not doing that either, right?
No.
That's the best way to decrease these ratios and raise your omega-3 index. Your ratios are awesome. And you've done it by a lower omega-6 intake than the average person and a solid omega-3 intake, and your body can convert. Your body can make enough EPA.
He's done it by the exact opposite of what this document told people to do.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of the take-home message, is that you can get this data on your own body. So like Cyrus said, okay, this is the crux of the issue. These people are saying scientific literature says this. Okay, fair enough. But if you are willing to live a healthy lifestyle for 4 months, you can go ahead and see in your own body, in your own life, is what they're saying true or false? End of story, no questions asked.
Correct. And most people read something like this and they don't have the counterpoint like we're talking about to give them enough confidence to actually do it and see the results for themselves. And that's part of why that whole, misinformation thing that there's so much of these days either throws people off track if they're already on track, or it dissuades them from going down a healthy track in the first place. And it's very unfortunate. And now here's the deal. We need enough omega-6s. Okay, I'm not against omega-6s. I include some in my diet, but those excessive levels, again, inhibit omega-3 conversion. Now, when you study 1,000 people outside of a major university, most of those people are eating processed foods. It means they're eating a high omega-6 diet. So then you give them some extra ALA. And then they find, you know what, how much EPA did we get? And they say maybe only 5% of the ALA converted to DHA, maybe 7, maybe 12. It depends on the study you look at. Sometimes they found no increase at all. So if you take 1,000 people and for 995 of them, you give them more ALA and you see a minimum increase and sometimes zero increase in DHA, your conclusion, logically enough, by looking at this is most people don't convert ALA into DHA very well. But there's a few outliers. And in my case, those outliers are the people who I see all the time. And what I've seen, just like we saw the three of us as examples, is when you don't eat too many omega-6s and you have enough omega-3s, then your body can convert ALA into EPA and DHA effectively. So they're looking at a population of conventionally eating processed food, high omega-6 people. And in fact, their conclusions are right. But when you eat very differently, sometimes, and this is a perfect example, your biochemistry is different And when you look at a different population base with different biochemistry, you oftentimes get different results. And this whole thing with omega-3 conversion here is a perfect example of that. So just again, on their behalf, it's not like they're total idiots. They're looking at the average junk food eating, meat-centered, low fiber, low fruit and vegetable eaters who are most people in the world these days.
Agreed.
We can transcend that with the type of diet that we all advocate, which is awesome to know.
I mean, to be totally honest, I feel like we're just kind of like barely scratching the surface here, because we can delve into much more detail on so many of the topics that we've covered today. But for the interest of time, we're going to have to kind of close it down.
Absolutely.
The most important thing that I learned in today's conversation is actually that Robbie is better than me for sure in two things. Number one, he's got a better omega-3 index, and number two, he's better than me at ping pong. But I'm gonna catch up at some point. But in all seriousness, Dr. Rick, your level of expertise on this subject, this is just one small subject, which you happen to have a dramatic expertise on. We can go on about plenty of other subjects as well. But you clearly have a very good command of this. And I think what you've done is laid it out for people very plainly and sort of dispelled a lot of the myths between men and women. How much bioindividuality is there? What is an omega-3 rich? What is omega-6 rich? What does eating a whole food plant-based diet actually do for you? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I always love talking with you. I think this is one of the most informative and one of the most practical interactions that we've had here in our summit ever, simply because you're going through real results. You're looking at Robbie's results, you're looking at your results, you're looking at my results, and we have nothing to hide because we do our best to eat a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. And, we're not perfect, but we're clearly in a very safe range. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We really appreciate all your effort and everything that you do.
You're very welcome. It's absolutely my pleasure. I could, spend 8 more hours with you guys talking shop about all this stuff. And actually, I had a bunch more slides prepared, but what we covered was great. And again, you can check us out on rawfoodeducation.com, and that's why we have a whole curriculum. That's why you guys have a whole program. This is just scratching the tip of the iceberg to let people know what the possibilities are. And for those who want to take it further, well, there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah. So if people want to become a groupie of yours, what's the best way to do it? Is it just to go to rawfoodeducation.com and then sign up for your mailing list?
Yeah, that would be the best thing to do. So, right, just like you said, rawfoodeducation.com, on every page over on the right-hand side, there's a place to sign up for our email list. And if you do that, you can get our little ebook on top 12 strategies for long-term success on a raw food diet. If you're not, don't get intimidated. If you don't want to eat all raw food, you could easily convert that, because a lot of it's mindset things, to top 12 strategies for long-term success on a whole food plant-based diet. And then from there, there's links to our YouTube channels, and there's information about our curriculum. And let me just also say that soon we're going to be updating our website to look a bit more professional, like yours does, like Mastering Diabetes does, to try to keep congruent with our professional level of teaching. But, it's all a work in progress.